At the beginning of the century, a horse-drawn streetcar, rhythmically clattering between the center and uptown Zimmering, was replaced by the electric tram. The new route was named Number 71, and ever since, for over 100 years, to depart by Tram 71 in Vienna means to leave this world. Modernization comes in these parts of the world for a reason. Before replacing the horse-drawn streetcar by the electric tram, the Vienna authorities gave the provincial Zimmering a whole new start. They opened a new cemetery there. In those years, Austria-Hungary, a brilliant Central European empire, was getting richer and stronger. Things were going fine. Its capital, the beautiful Vienna, is experiencing a rapid demographic increase. By the 1990s, the authorities expected to have many millions of the population instead of the current 1.5 million. Probably, it could have happened. It's only that high ambition, irreconcilability with other states, national tension, and yet that damn shot ruined all the expectations. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo gave a start to World War I, and soon Austria-Hungary, the great, mighty, brilliant empire, disappeared. And the huge cemetery, built for the capital of Europe, is still here. Why should it care? The dead cannot hear any shots. The new cemetery was located far away. It takes 45 minutes to get there, even on modern Tram 71. Nobody wanted to bury their loved ones in such a remote place, and then the authorities took the plunge with an unprecedented advertising campaign. The main participants in the advertising endorsement campaign were Viennese celebrities, and here is one of them, Ludwig van Beethoven. His remains were transferred here from one small cemetery. Franz Schubert also rests in peace in a new place nearby. Johann Strauss and Johannes Brahms, no matter how different they were, both found their last home in the central cemetery and rest there shoulder to shoulder. And to be buried in one cemetery with such great guys is a completely different story. Pretty quickly, the cemetery filled and soon became an object of joke. The Viennese used to say, "Our graveyard is as big as a half Zurich, but twice as fun." In the same light-hearted manner, they opened the Funeral Museum. It was established by the main Viennese funeral company, Bestattung Wien. Since 1907, they were Austrian funeral monopolists, and only recently the EU market economy watchdogs forced them to eliminate the barriers for competitors in the country. But before, it was simple. You see a hearse, it's Bestattung Wien delivery to the cemetery. Until now, in neighboring European countries, where the rules for funeral services are stricter, they have Vienna funeral tourism. They buy a one-way ticket to the deceased. To come here, to Vienna, to these guys, they certainly will not set roadblocks for a funeral hearse. For example, a coffin in high-tech style. It looks like a cocoon. The cocoon is where a new life is born. Then you have an entire allusion to the ancient image of life and death. Almost like this. And this is the 18th century high-tech, a beautiful Baroque coffin. Here it has tulips. Quickly and sadly withering flowers. This coffin was found in the crypt under the Church of St. Michael in the center of Vienna. The unique microclimate helped to preserve not only the wooden coffin, but also the dead inside it. The museum received the coffin without any contents. This is another attribute of the magnificent Viennese funeral tradition, a pearl wreath. Only fairly wealthy Austrians could afford it. All the branches and flowers of this wreath were handmade from pearls by 100 workers. Being a city of art and dandies, Vienna could not refrain from likening the wooden costume to the historical one. The tone was set by the Belgian surrealist artist René Magritte. He literally put the most famous stories of world painting into coffins. You yawn your lives out till you fall into the coffin that yawns for all, said Mephistopheles to Faust, and Magritte to all of us. The coffin makers took the series of Magritte's works as a personal dedication, moreover as a guide to action, and made a sit-down coffin for real. And now, yawning, it's waiting for someone to use it. Now the building at 8, Raunsteingasse, is visited by 30,000 people daily. It's one of the most popular Viennese department stores. And in 1791, here was a house where only one unknown visitor came, and he too wanted to make an order. The contractor was a subject of the Austrian Emperor, Wolfgang Mozart. Mozart is the most famous Viennese composer, one of the most popular faces on souvenir lighters, and the most important Viennese deceased. He's always been like this, and who knows, maybe, if the Viennese authorities, for advertising purposes, had transferred the great Mozart's body here to the new cemetery, they would have even had to expand the territory. But Mozart was not buried here, and no one knows where he was buried. In the central cemetery, there is only a cenotaph, a symbolic grave, without remains under it.
The composer was so poor that he was buried in a collective grave.
All music teachers tell this to children from Vienna to small towns lost in Siberia. In Milos Forman's movie Amadeus, Mozart is brought to the grave in a cemetery, and then he, sewn into a sack, is thrown out of the coffin. In fact, the great composer wasn't buried like that. But first things first. How was it? Are genius and villainy two incompatible things? No way! That's a no. He sent me out into the cold to meet some... The man who came to Mozart was Count von Walsig's messenger. He wanted to order a requiem for his untimely passed away young wife, and on receiving requiem, he was going to assign its authorship to himself, an absolutely normal practice for Count von Walsig. Count von Walsig was supposed to receive the exclusive copyright to this document and its immortal content. This is the manuscript of Mozart's Requiem. It is kept in the Austrian National Library. For the first time, Requiem was performed after the death of Mozart and was called the composition of Count von Walsig. The excitement and hype around the creation of Requiem was too loud to hide the authorship of the Requiem, which the composer turned out to have written for himself. From the Viennese was, of course, impossible. By the time of Mozart's death, in Europe, a terrible epidemic had already been in full swing. It was gradually spinning up and reached its peak in the 19th century. This epidemic had nothing to do with bacteria, nor with viruses, nor with fungi. It had a mental character. When I tried to shout, it turned out that my jaw was tied up like a dead man's. Besides, I felt a hard bed under myself, and something had pressed on me from my sides. I threw my hands up in despair. They hit hard boards. After that, I no longer had any doubt that I was lying in a coffin. Edgar Poe's good eye helped him to be on the cutting edge. In the 19th century, Europe was swept by taphophobia, the fear of being buried alive. Another epidemic, cholera, was strengthening too. You drank some water and that was it. The epidemic killed tens of thousands. Moreover, the disease causes lethargic conditions, close to death in symptoms. And who's going to look into whether you took tram 71 or a wrong number? Doctors, engineers, and charlatans too, from around the world, rushed to invent a cure for taphophobia, and this was an alarm button. It was supposed that if you, like the character of Edgar Poe, woke up in the dark and realized you'd been buried, then you would not lose courage and ring the bell. The cemetery workers would worry, come running to you, dig you up and save your body, unfairly devoted to the earth. In the true sense of the word, sleep a peaceful, lethargical sleep, dear friend. Meine Damen und Herren, just today, let me show you a unique product, a safe coffin. How many times have you been tortured by insomnia when you were afraid to wake up in the dark and squeezed, to put it simply, in a coffin? Our service is called Die and Ring. Send us a telegram right now and you will receive a first-class funeral as a gift. And indeed, after introducing such coffins, the Vienna cemetery heard the bell ringing. This is due to the fact that, as a result of the decomposition of the body, the escape of gases and the action of the elementary force of gravity of the dead hands, the mechanism comes into motion. The bell rings a false alarm. In the end, cemetery workers even stopped checking graves for premature burial. The bell rings for no one. History doesn't know any case of this miraculous salvation of an erroneously buried person. The fear could only step back. Modern medicine makes no mistakes determining the fact of death. But for peace of mind, you can order a warranty service. Your heart will be pierced with a needle. And now, for good. No, I didn't want any evil for the master. I'm ready to spend the whole winter here, on this darn street, jumping. I only hope he will recover. On receiving the order for Requiem, Mozart went to Prague. There was a coronation of a new emperor, Leopold II. On returning, he got down to work again. He needed to finish the opera The Magic Flute, and only after this, Mozart started Requiem. What started happening with Mozart? No one knows. He fell ill and described his symptoms this way. My head is in splitting pain. I can hardly talk. I cannot drive away the image of the unknown from my eyes. Perhaps perhaps this was a banal neuralgia. It was possible that he had renal failure or rheumatic encephalitis. Mozart's joints had been hurting since childhood. Perhaps a congenital defect of the urinary or the renal tract. Due to fever and bloodletting, the disease reached the last stage. Or even Graves' disease. In portraits, Mozart's eyes seem to be excessively bulging. It's still not known who this Mozart's unknown was. Count von Walzig's messenger, for sure, hurried the composer to finish in time, but he could hardly frighten him so much. The composer Salieri, at the end of his life, was delirious with Mozart's poisoning, but it's unlikely that he would appear before a friend as an unknown person, so most likely, Mozart's unknown was really unknown. In the last hours of his life, Mozart was finishing Requiem and was trying to do as much as he could find energy for. He asked to take his beloved canary to another room, and even in his dying delirium, he puffed his cheeks, imitating the punches of timpani. Mozart died. Now they had to bury him. That's when this mysterious story with a collective grave started. Dankeschön. To die in Vienna meant, above all, to create an informational topic. Every year in October, newspapers published funeral fashion. How to dress for a funeral this year. And don't you even dare come to the cemetery in the black outfit of the previous season fashion. Here are the funeral clothes in which Viennese ladies were shining in one of the funeral seasons. A hat from English crepe, funeral beads, funeral earrings, a funeral corsage, finally a funeral umbrella in case of a funeral rain. All funeral processions were divided into classes. Schöne Leich is the most beautiful of all the beautiful funerals. At the descent into the mysterious shadows of a tomb, the guests of the deceased were met by the gatekeeper with a pikestaff, with a rod. These pikestaffs are also in the museum. One of them has a sign, Pietat. This German word means piety in relation to the deceased, but Pietat is also the name of the company producing funeral supplies. That is, Pietat is like a brand logo of sports clothes on the chest of a football player. For Viennese children of the 19th century, special toys that simulated a funeral were produced.
A funeral is not only a ceremonial rite, it is also an important social event like weddings, birthday parties, a Viennese ball, or a dinner party.
And we need to know how to behave in a black-collar society from childhood. They're figures of a military funeral procession, carved from a children's set of 1855. Look. Everyone's dressed up. And some time ago it was serious. Peasants could afford buying a coffin only in a bumper crop year, so they bought it. Why shouldn't they if they had the money? In the meantime, while they didn't need it, well, it could be used as a bookcase. Everyone dies, both the rich and the poor, and this is a coffin for the poor. But there was a time in Vienna when coffins for the poor were such for everyone. The enlightened Emperor Joseph observed the funeral passions of the Viennese from his palace Schönbrunn like this. He didn't like it. Firstly, a thoughtless waste of money. Secondly, contacts with a dead body. What about a sudden cholera? Thirdly, a long decomposition. No person, no disease. Therefore, a special imperial decree ordered everyone, without any exceptions, to be buried in sewn canvas sacks. And the coffin was used exclusively to deliver the body to the grave. Here it is, a reusable coffin. It always touched the ground, then the mechanism worked. The bottom opened, the deceased remained on the ground, and the coffin was taken up and was used for the second, third, and any number of times. That is how Mozart was buried in Milos Forman's movie. By the time Mozart finished his earthly course, the decree of Emperor Joseph had finished its effect. It was not even put into effect. The fact is that, despite the 18th century and nominal autocracy, the Emperor of Austria was obliged to get all decrees approved by the Vienna magistrate, and citizens, having got to know what was waiting for them, started protests. The decree was rejected, and the reusable coffins were never used in Vienna. And all the stories about Mozart that found their way to the mass culture were invented only on the basis of the Imperial Decree, which was never enforced. So, why is there no Mozart's grave? He wasn't buried in a collective grave. He wasn't sewn into a canvas sack. He didn't lie with drunkards, tramps, clochards, and criminals. At that time, all common Austrians were buried in collective graves without any exception. It meant that in 10 years, someone else could be buried in a private grave, then someone else and someone else. How could they lose the grave of the most famous Austrian composer? This is a mystery. Maybe the people of Vienna just got distracted by another funeral. People have died, and they will die, but only in Vienna. This sad process will be accompanied by a ritual, imposing like the Viennese architecture. Because it is in Vienna, the city of Mozart, where people adopted a Russian expression unfamiliar to themselves as a motto: if it's time to die, get the music on.